Welcome to the Create What You Speak podcast. Join me as we have a real-life discussion on how to change your life by changing your thoughts. Remember, question everything, trust yourself, and find your truth. Welcome to the Create What You Speak podcast. My name is Sloan Fremont, and I'm your host. Today, our topic is all about relationships. And I think you may be surprised to find after you end up listening to this episode that conventional wisdom that we're told, that we're brought up on, that we read about in magazines, maybe that was passed down from, family to family, as that's just the way it is. I think you're going to find at the end of this episode that what we've been taught and what we know and don't know about relationships has actually basically been wrong all along. My guest today is Jerry Brook, and he is an author. He's an app developer. It's a lot of other things that he's done, but he's used his stories and his personal experience to really dig into relationships, to understand why we do what we do and why we do what we don't do. And there's a lot of things that he found as he's went through his own journey that have really, to me, the way we have this interview, what he talks about in his book, it's really a completely different way to look at things that you may already know. So if you're in a relationship, which is pretty much everybody listening to this episode, because we're in relationships, not only in our intimate relationships, but with our families, our friends, our coworkers, right? Relationships are all around us, and we're dealing with them every day in our day-to-day life. If you're somebody who wants to improve any relationship in your own life, I think you're really going to love this episode. There's a lot here. As I said, there's a lot about looking at and understanding relationships from a different perspective. And that's really the goal each week that I do on this show, is I bring you guests who offer different perspectives other than what the mainstream or what everyone else is saying, right? On this show, we like to talk about different things. We like to talk about other options, other perspectives. And I think with this conversation today, we really delivered on this, especially on such an important topic such as relationships. Before we get into the interview with Jerry, I just want to remind you, if you haven't signed up for my newsletter, please visit my website, sloanfremont.com. On the right-hand side, you're going to see the box where you can enter your email address and your name, and you'll get signed up for the newsletter. I've got some things coming up here in the next couple of months that you're not going to want to miss out on, and those who are on the newsletter list will get first. They'll get to know about it first. So if you have to pause the video, pause the audio, go ahead and get signed up, and then come back and listen when you're done. And then the other thing I always remind at every episode is if we're not connected on social media, I would love to connect with you. All of my links are in the show notes. So be sure to scroll down. Let's get connected, and then you can get back to the episode. So again, this topic today is so important. I really loved this conversation. I could have talked with Jerry for hours, but I think I'm going to have him back on after the first of the year so we can continue this and talk about it a little more. Joining me today is Jerry Brook, creator of the Good Together Game app and author of the book, A Journey Through Relationships. Finding, building, or maintaining relationships can be stressful. We all know this, but not having relationships is even more stressful. The Good Together Game app removes much of the stresses associated with forging better relationship bonds. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is relationships. So Jerry, I want to welcome you to the Create What You Speak podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate that.
Yes. So this topic of relationships is this has been a huge one. This has been a big focus of the show over the years. I've talked about my issues, my frustrations, my problems. So I'm really excited to talk with you about this today. And I know the audience is going to love it. So let's start out by telling the audience just a little bit about yourself, the app, the book, and kind of what led you on your journey. Probably a lot.
Yeah, well, there's so much to go over. Relationships, we're born into relationships. Mm-hmm. I mean, you're born, as a child, you have obviously a relationship with your family. You get to be 5 or 6 years old, you go off to school, you have relationships with friends. As a teenager, you start experimenting with intimate relationships. You're learning how, to get involved. And then you go off into business. Those are all relationships. Your whole life is relationships. Yeah. And so it was funny to me. I didn't start down this journey. I stumbled into it. I took a wrong turn, and I was like, wait, where am I? So I had, my relationships, which had all failed. I think that's fairly common that people go through these relationships. But I'm a type person, so I'm very analytical. I'm into computers. And one of the things I pride myself on is that I follow directions and I really seek them out and I learn it. And I'm like, okay, I would ask people for help. I would read books and I kept failing. And I'm like, wait, what is going on here? There's something really wrong. And so at some point you just, or at least I look in the mirror and go, okay, I'm a failure. I don't know what I'm doing. I can't figure this out. And so there's something wrong with me. I cannot be in a relationship.
Yeah.
Assuming that everybody else is right. And I'm wrong.
Right. That's our assumption. Yes.
Yeah. It's funny how people do that. We do kind of internalize immediately and we're like, oh, there must be something wrong with me. Well, then we turn to, no, there's something wrong with you.
Right.
And we never get to, there's something wrong with the information that we're getting.
Right.
And so what happened with me is, I'd thrown in the towel. I was like, I give up. No more. I'm going to be, a monk. I'm celibate. That's it.
Over it.
And so I threw myself into work, like say with computers, and I was looking into artificial intelligence. And I know it's really a weird place to start.
No, I love this part. I was going to ask you about this. Yeah.
But it's like, so it begs the question, okay, what is intelligent? I mean, we throw this word around, and honestly, it's very much now marketing. I'm into it, and I'm just like, I don't like the way it's going and what people are putting into it. But that aside, I was like, okay, so what does it mean to be intelligent? And it's like, oh, well, it's decision making. Okay, so then I started learning and researching about, well, what does it take to make good decisions? Well, it takes information and thought process, critical thinking. And I was like, but I've never been taught this. I've been to school. I've never been taught any of this. And it was just an aha moment when I was like, oh my gosh, I'm not making good relationship decisions. I'm not being intelligent, artificial or otherwise, in relationships. I'm like, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. But then I started to realize, oh, but wait a minute. The people who are telling me these things, because I actually started to research what is conventional wisdom, D-U-M-B.
I love how you spell, yes.
I'm like, I'm sorry, but this is just horrific.
Yeah.
Some of it is just wasted and other information is really detrimental.
Right.
And so I started researching, and you'd be appalled at where a lot of conventional wisdom comes from. Some of it is based on mythology, thousands of years old, Greek mythology.
Yes.
And it's like, wait, that's what we're basing our relationships on? A bunch of people who had no idea what was going on. So I really started to then dissect and analyze the conventional wisdom. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is horrific. But yet this is all we had, at least all I had, and all that I was being given. And I was like, I started to, it's funny because I actually then started to feel a little bit more relaxed and comfortable. And so far as I was like, I stopped blaming myself. I was like, okay, you're not a total idiot. I'm not the smartest, but I'm not like that stupid, right?
Right.
But here's the funny thing too. I then started to then realize that I forgave other people, like in a way that, because I was like, okay, you didn't do anything intentionally to ruin the relationship or to hurt me. You too were basing your decisions on this faulty information. And so we were both victims of a really bad system. And so it really allowed me, it was a bit of a catharsis to let go of all those negative feelings.
And take it off of yourself. And it's not, not piling that blame on you. And
as well as the other person. Like I said, it really, that's the other thing too, because it's like, you go through life thinking, oh, these horrible people and what are they doing? But then you look back and go, oh, no, you're no different than I am. You couldn't have made any better decisions with bad information. We have a saying in computers, garbage in, garbage out. And that's the whole thing. It was like, well, this is all garbage.
Right. And what I love, so I'm going to go back to what you were talking about at the beginning about having that like analytical mind, because I do as well. I worked in IT for 13 years now,
cool.
and my job is an analyst. Like that's what I do. So
Nice.
so I can remember being on projects years ago, and we would make a joke about it, but we were all very serious when we were doing this, because I worked with a bunch of other programmers and analysts and project managers, right? So we were used to a formula, like with a project,
Yes.
right? You
Yes.
go through various steps to get to the end result. So all of us kind of had the mindset of, well, if it works for projects, then why can't that work in our relationships, right?
100%.
And so then we would have these whiteboards, and we would whiteboard out like whatever our perceived problem was at that time, right? And then I remember finally getting to the point where I was trying to operate my life that way. And I'm like, this doesn't work. I just have to I just finally have to come to the realization that this doesn't work. I have to approach my relationships differently, which was stressful in itself, because I was like, well, then I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just like flailing around out here trying to figure things out. Nobody else knows either. But what I really loved in your book, you talk about how with that conventional wisdom, and how people are like, the stories you hear today, or the people that are writing about it, or even like poets from previous, you talked about many years ago, right? All of these people are like, that's not the norm, right? But it's somehow become.
They're projecting.
Right.
They're actually saying, I failed in my relationship, and this is what I wished had happened, even though that's not reality and it could never have happened. And then they put it into, yes, poetry and songs, and it gets out into the world, and people believe, oh yeah, that's the way a relationship should be. Right. It's like, no, it's not. It's actually very dysfunctional.
Yes. And yes, it is completely. Now that, and the way you wrote that in your book, I was like, yes, that is exactly right. And you said something, I don't know exactly how you worded it, but you were like, the people who are in satisfying relationships aren't the one having to go around and tell everybody about, they're just satisfied, right? So they're not even thinking about, 100%. But then you have all these people who are out there like, like the dysfunction continues because they're the ones out there talking about it more than the people who are in the satisfying relationships. I thought that was really eye-opening to me.
Well, it's true. You don't go searching for an answer if you don't have a question.
Right.
So if you're happy in your relationship, you're not questioning your relationship or the person you're with. And so, yeah, you don't go searching for questions.
Right.
Or for answers, I'm sorry. The only person who does that is the person who fails. And so you actually want to look at the quote unquote failure who has then went out in search and said, okay, this is what happened to me. And so could it have happened differently?
Yeah.
So you're looking for the answer. Look, if your tire never goes flat, you're not the person to ask how to change a flat tire. Exactly, you just don't know how because you've never done.
Right.
So it's like, yeah, don't worry about it. And the other part of that too that I've really found there again with the conventional wisdom is those people who do have good relationships and who we do ask, they truly don't know. So I appreciate what you're doing, and I kind of agree. You're right. To a degree, there should be somewhat of a formula that we can follow.
I wish there was.
Well, but see, it's not as strict.
Right.
Exactly. I do projects, and yes. It's not. And even in projects, it frustrates me when people who don't do projects come to me and are so strict and they're like, are you 100% on this? Because then you have to start that. I'm like, no, that's not how life works, dude.
Right,
Sit
exactly.
back.
You have to balance the real world in with anything that you're doing.
100%. And so there is a bit of a formula. And that's why one of the things I say is, there again, if this conventional wisdom that's been around literally for, in some cases, thousands of years, if it was so good, we'd all have wonderful relationships.
Right,
we'd simply crack open the book and go, oh, page 32 says I need to do this, that, and the other in this situation. Great. But it doesn't exist. It's not that way.
It doesn't. And, one of the other points you brought up in your book, too, is about knowing who we are and knowing what we want. Because that was something for me, many years I floated around. I knew what I didn't want, but I never identified what it was that I did want. I didn't identify the qualities in a person, or I didn't, even in myself, like who am I, other than, maybe my job at the time or whatever it might've been. And that, I guess if there was a formula, that to me is kind of the starting place, understanding who you are and what it is you want. Because if you don't know those things, you're just floating around, like I said.
100%. So, I kind of, there again, I'm analytical. So you will see that, in the book and on my blog and in my videos, I approach things,